So, because all of our animals are rescues, we don't usually know when their birthdays are, and that's true for our miniature Shetland Mario. We know he's probably turning 13 sometime this year, but we don't know when. So instead of celebrating our furry family members' birthdays, here at the Sanctuary we instead tend to celebrate the day they were rescued. Some people call it a gotcha day, others an adoptiversary or rescueversary, and I tend to flitter between all three. So to celebrate the second anniversary of Mario's arrival at the Sanctuary, we decided it was only fitting to make him his own special birthday cake. Or gotcha day cake, I should probably say. I did intend to do this for his first rescueversary, but there was a lot going on at the time and I just never got round to it, but better late than never, I guess. And hopefully he'll have plenty more anniversaries to celebrate here. So to make this cake, I decided to use these cute little cake tins. I found them at a charity shop a few years ago for only £1 or £2 each, and I bought them primarily because I thought they were the perfect size for making cakes for animals. I looked at several online recipes for inspiration, but ultimately I just sort of combined several to get the cake I'll be making today. I'll be including the measurements and instructions in case you want to make your own version, but I was kind of just making it up as I went along, so I definitely recommend watching the whole thing before you try and recreate it, since I was making adjustments on the fly. So to begin, I preheated my oven to 160 degrees Celsius, which is this in Fahrenheit. And for reference, my oven is fan assisted, so again, you might have to adjust it depending on your own oven type. Then I lined my tins by tracing around the base on baking parchment, and then extending the outline and cutting it out, and then cutting down to the inner line to create these like tabs all around the edge. I feel like I'm doing an awful job at explaining that, but hopefully you can see what I'm doing from the video. I have no idea if this is the best or proper way to line a cake tin with paper, but it's the way I was always taught, so... I used, I would say like a carrot and a half maybe in this cake, maybe a little less. I was using carrots taken from those big sacks you buy for horses, which are much less uniform than the ones you get in the supermarket. They're all the ones that were deemed unsuitable for sale to humans, usually because they're broken, too big, too small, or too, unmonetizable? But yeah, the amount of carrot I used was probably equivalent to around 1.5 supermarket carrots. I mean, look, if you want a recipe that's like super specific, then this is very much not the video, or probably channel for you, I'm afraid. I'm someone who mostly just operates by like vibe, I guess? I don't know. Anyway, once you've grated your carrots, then you can put them to one side and measure out your dry ingredients. I used about 65 grams of all-purpose flour, 50 grams of oats, although I did add a bit more later, so maybe like 60 or 70 grams, and about a teaspoon of sugar. Then I mixed the oats, flour and sugar together before adding in the grated carrot. This is around the time I also added the extra oats because it didn't quite look like enough. I also added these things, which are basically just the crumbs from the bottom of a bag of commercial horse treats. I thought they might look cute, like currants or chocolate chips or something. The treats were actually donated by a friend of the Sanctuary as a Christmas present for Mario, and they had festive spices in, which he really seems to like, so if I hadn't put these in, I probably would have added a touch of horse-friendly spices. Then I measured out and added 45 grams of honey, and honestly, I'm surprised this is the first time I've made a mess in this whole process. And again, I added a bit more later because the mixture seemed a little dry. I might have ended up adding a touch too much honey, so I'd say maybe go for 50 grams. I also added, I think, a couple of tablespoons of water at some point too. I really should have been keeping better track of what I was doing as I was doing it, but again, I operate purely on vibes. Then I mixed everything together and it was time to bring the cake tins back in. I had absolutely no idea how much mixture I'd end up with, and it turned out to be exactly the right amount for the two tins. The consistency is very different to a typical cake batter, and honestly it's a lot easier to just use your hands to get it into the tins. You want to pack the mixture in pretty tightly, pressing it in as much as you can. Because this doesn't have any raising agents in like a typical cake, you don't have to worry about it overflowing if you fill it right to the top. I was honestly surprised by how tasty these looked. Like, as a human, I wouldn't turn these down. Anyway, they were finally ready for the oven, and because I was just making things up as I went, I had absolutely no idea how long to bake them for. Because I had two, I decided to experiment a little. One I left in for probably between like 5 and 10 minutes, and the other I left in for between 10 and 15 minutes. And then left it in after turning the oven off until the oven had cooled. They both came out fine. The one that was cooked a little less was a tiny bit spongier in texture, whereas the one that was cooked for longer was ever so slightly crispier, at least on the top, or bottom I guess, but they both seemed completely fine, so I'd recommend a 10-minute cooking time. Although obviously the time is going to vary depending on the size and shape of your tin, so I don't actually know how helpful that is. Like I said, there are no specifics here. You might have to work things out for yourself a little. If it helps, the tins I was using are about 10 by 10 centimeters at the widest points. I left the cakes to cool in their tins completely because I was worried if I tried to take them out while they were warm, the honey wouldn't have set and they'd have fallen apart. But once they were cool, they both came out really easily, and they look so good! I'm so pleased with how these came out. Because I was just making things up as I went, I was so worried they were going to go wrong or they'd just crumble when I tried to take them out of the tins, but they didn't. These cakes would also be perfectly safe to eat as a human, minus probably the bits of horse treat I put in. And I would have loved to try a bit myself since they look surprisingly tasty. But unfortunately I used regular flour and I'm allergic to gluten, so I just had to sniff them. But they smell pretty good thanks to the spices. Because these cakes are for Mario's second adoptiversary, I decided to add 2 birthday candles in the form of carrots, cut and trimmed down into thick sticks. I cut little holes into the softer of the 2 cakes and just wedged them in there. So now it's time to see what a tiny horse thinks of his tiny cake. Yeah, I think it's safe to say that he likes them. I had to stop filming because I didn't want him to eat the whole thing at once and make himself ill, but it's safe to say that this cake is definitely Mario approved. For some reason, I imagined him eating the carrots first, and then maybe just having a bite of the cake rather than trying to stuff the entire thing into his mouth at once. I should really know him better by now, it's been 2 years. Despite the fact that Mario would have absolutely loved to just inhale both cakes in their entirety, that obviously wouldn't have been very good for them, so the second cake and the remnants of the first were split up between the other horses at the stable, who all seemed to love it just as much as our boy. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you do decide to make your own cake, then I would love to know how it went for you and what your animals thought of it. So please feel free to leave that in a comment. And if you enjoyed this video, then I would love it if you could like the video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. As well as videos about life here on the Sanctuary, we also have the Animal Nerd podcast and plenty of other stuff too, so be sure to check out our channel if you haven't already. Thank you again for watching and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!